What's up, Chasers? Severe season is in full swing, and we see that this week as there are going to be systems all across the US. Stay tuned because we're going to tell you what's going to happen, where it'll be, and when it will happen.
So first taking a look at our SPC outlook on day 2, we have our highlighted risk area similar to what we had today with our enhanced area up in Wisconsin, Iowa, and the Illinois region with a very large slight risk extending all the way from Michigan down to West Texas. Now, our southern mode will be a bit more questionable depending on if storms initiate or not, but we will see that in a moment that the environment is very favorable for it. Similarly, up here we will have a greater chance of initiation, and confidence is highest in this being a pretty high end tornado threat up in the Iowa and Illinois region with our 10% hatched risk, meaning that we have a probability for EF2 or greater tornadoes. Additionally, we also have a good wind risk and a very concentrated hail risk across this area, as supercells will be capable of all hazards, including large hail. Now, moving into day 3 on Wednesday, we see another highlighted slight risk area across the Midwest and the Illinois and Iowa region as our shortwave and overall troughing pattern continues to eject into the Central Plains. The SPC has noted that there is dryline initiation favored across the southern edge. While we will have morning convection ongoing, a second round of storms is expected to develop across much of this area.
So, looking at the day 4 through 8 weather forecasts, we see that there's not really going to be anything predicted for the day 4 outlook. There's going to be kind of a short or smaller ridge that's going over the central-ish US. But looking forward to day 5, we see that the SPC has outlined a 15% risk over much of the central United States, expanding from Oklahoma up into almost Wisconsin. The SPC has noted that this is just for a all hazards type situation with cells being able to fire, and there's just a bit more confidence in that than there are for the later days, as we see days 6, 7, and 8 don't either have predictability too low, or the potential for severe weather is just too low for them to issue a outlook this far out.
So, kind of looking at our pattern for our day 2 outlook, we see a couple things. We see one big trough over the western portion of the US, and up in the north central portion, there is also a shortwave trough up there, as well as in the northern parts of the US, we have phasing between two jet streaks, and further down south, there is areas in that right entrance. So, kind of a lot of motion aloft just on that day 2. Now looking kind of at day 3, we still see that same scenario. Those troughs moving further east, taking the risk with it. Now looking more at the central plains, central US, where we have the divergence in the upper level jet, as well as divergence with those troughs aloft.
I also do want to jump in. We're probably going to have a bigger synoptic forcing event here because you see all these embedded shortwaves along with our jet streak being more favorable, with more areas in the right entrance indicating upper level divergence, meaning low level convergence will act as a lifting mechanism, along with the dry line down here in the southern areas of our risk area. We also have continued southerly wind advection off of the Gulf, advecting warm, moist air into our area. And looking at our mid levels at 700, we also have plentiful moisture to work with.
So moving on to that day 4, towards the central US, we kind of see that weak ridge developing in between the two troughs, which is kind of going to limit some of the forcing for storms, as well as not a lot of organization in our upper level jet, not a lot of room for anything upper level forcing wise.
One thing that's also important to note is that throughout the day Thursday, we're going to have this low pressure system developing in the lee of our Rockies, which is going to enhance and tighten our pressure gradient across most of the central and southern plains. And you can kind of see that here as our 850 millibar winds will strengthen up through the day on Thursday, heading into the overnight hours, as warm, moist air will be strongly advected into our risk area for Friday.
And not only that, when that low pressure, as it moves on, it's the trailing front from it is going to interact with the dry line, changing the type of lifting we're getting. And so it's going to be kind of more, it's going to be more forcing from the cold front moving rather than just the dry line that's been in place across the central US.
All right, so looking into Friday at our 250 millibar level. Got a big trough, upper level trough over the western United States. And we also have a jet streak out ahead of that trough, just to the southeast of the trough, and centered over, say, the panhandle of Texas. And that'll provide a lot of synoptic lifting and upper level divergence to specifically downstream of that trough over the sort of northern Great Plains, northeastern Great Plains, and then at our 850 millibar level, we also have strong warm air advection happening ahead of that trough. Strong southerly flow, southwesterly flow as well. And then at our surface, we've got a low centered over Nebraska. That'll provide, that is formed in the divergent regions of both the left exit region of that 250 millibar jet streak and downstream of that upper level trough.
Something else I want to throw in before we move later on, you can see that there's a bunch of like really small short waves embedded on like the right side of that trough. That's also going to help with storm initiation. And something that wasn't really outlined in the SPC's outlooks is that the associated cold front with that really big low as it moves up more northeast will help to form a QLCS that's going to move through a bunch of the like southeastern states. So while that isn't specifically outlined in any of the outlooks, it's something to keep an eye on.
Right.
I also want to throw in there, if we kind of look back at our jet level, the direction that jet is coming from, that's coming from a subtropical jet. So, kind of some of what we're going to be seeing in those upper levels is added moisture in the upper levels. So that's going to support, that's going to give us moisture up high.
I think we're going to see some very high P-watt values from this, and we're going to see a lot of heavy precipitation.
I was seeing stuff reaching up to almost 2 inches when I was looking at this earlier.
It just depends on the overall storm motion, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But if we get some training to set up, we could see some very heavy rainfall rates.
Yeah, it'd be very efficient.
Look at that subtropical jet. We've got onshore flow over the Gulf. It's just moisture filled. Yeah,
if you want moisture, you got it.
All of it going to be compressed against that cold front too as it starts to trail through. Like that's, it's going to compact it a lot. So,
right.
There's going to be rain. It's going to pop off.
And we can kind of just see that as we progress through Saturday, and we have our intensification of the jet streak and as well as our low-level jet during the overnight hours. So we'll have to watch and see if training can set up as this trough continues to progress through the central plains and our low continues to move off to the north and east, bringing its ensuing cold front across the southeast U.S. through the weekend. Wow, what the heck?
Yeah, no, that gets super
tropic upglide, maybe.
Yeah. When I said subtropical jet and onshore flow, look at that.
Yeah, that can really be exemplified here. Is the front supposed to stall off the coast here?
Yeah, it stalls.
Yeah, I believe so.
And it's going to do that kind of Sunday morning, Saturday night.
We have that continued subtropical jet flow here with some slightly weaker but still present warm and moist air advection. We could see a lot of rain out of this looking into Sunday and Monday if this holds. Because if you got all that moisture in the atmosphere. Oof.
Okay. All right. So looking at our cloud cover for tomorrow, we see that there are there's quite a bit of cloud cover over the enhanced risk area, over Iowa and Wisconsin and northern Illinois. They're mostly mid-level clouds, even though there are some lower-level clouds kind of on the in the eastern part of the enhanced area, and then a little bit on the western side as well. And then looking at our this for the the rest of the slight risk area, which extends from Michigan all the way down to um, into Texas, into the we see that there is quite a bit of high cloud cover, especially from Missouri extending down to Texas. And then there's also some what appears to be um, maybe some more mid level clouds, just extending from just kind of Kansas, Missouri, down to into Texas and all the way to the border. And just going forward in time by um, 23Z, which would be um, 6 p.m. Central Time, we see the cloud cover, especially the upper level cloud cover, seems to persist. There is some breaking. There, it seems like the mid level clouds over Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma tend to break a little bit. This is for the slight risk area, and then for the enhanced risk area, there is definitely a lot more clearing out, especially in northern Illinois and southern and eastern Iowa. And then there are some mid-level clouds as well that seem to persist over southern Wisconsin, unless those are the ones associated with the convection.
Yeah, I was just about to
Possibly.
say, I think the Her has a bit more northern initiation in northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, and western Wisconsin, but I think it is really important to understand that if this model does verify with how much clearing we see in this enhanced risk area, we're going to see a lot of storm initiation tomorrow. I don't think it's a question of if at this point, it's more of when and where because
Yeah, you're
we have
gonna
a
get
lot
a
of
lot of.
clearing here that's going to allow daytime heating to be able to destabilize the atmosphere further and be able to break through that cap, at least in this enhanced area. The bigger question right now is across the southern area, the southern risk area, depending on if we can get enough cloud breakage, but it looks like our synoptic forcing with our right entrance region will be good enough to be able to initiate.
I think part of what's going to be hard about some of the southern area of the risk is, I mean, we saw all these things bringing all this moisture in, and we haven't taken quite a look at what the moisture values are, but just from the onshore flow and the subtropical jet, there's so much moisture over the southern central areas of the U.S. So, I mean, clouds, unfortunately, with all this lifting and moisture, are without a doubt going to be there. But also, there's an element of even with the cloud deck, I think the instability is still going to be fairly high, just because we're basically going to be near our dew points near the surface. So, and of course
Yeah,
across the column.
higher level clouds don't uh, really block as much of that solar radiation that's being used for diurnal heating, right? So even though we have that deck of upper level clouds over the more southern central U.S., like the Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska regions, there's going to still be some amount of daytime heating to really help with that instability down there. Okay, so looking at tomorrow's area over the enhanced risk, we see that there's some going to be some initial convection popping up across the region, and this is going to, if it does come to fruition, it's going to help take away some of the instability that we'd be seeing in the afternoon, but not by much. We're going to still have that break in the clouds, allowing for that daytime heating to hit the surface, increase instability. So then moving on later through the day, we see that we're going to have some storms and start to fire up, and this is going to be really the big weather maker for the day. We're going to initially start out with some what appears to be discrete cells that are going to not quickly grow upscale, but eventually grow upscale into what seems to be an MCS with some more cells firing up behind it, and then going more eastward with time.
Kind of comparing that with the NAM, we can see that the discrete convection that was on the HER, that messy convection, look at this right here. This is way more organized, way more than the HER was showing. So there's already a lot that might restabilize the atmosphere ahead of some of these storms in the early morning. But as we go on in the day, we kind of see a lot more messy convection on the NAM. While we do have some of these discrete cells, just look how much, and it grows up much faster, much quicker, but not really. What's the word I want to use?
As robust, I would say.
Yeah, not
Like
robust.
they're still discrete, but with it being as a little bit more messier than what the HER was showing, you're going to have all those cells really close together, and the outflow from each of those differing cells are going to kind of mess with each other and not allow them to be as robust as would otherwise be possible.
Right, and I actually think that's something that could be an interesting talking point is if you have this cluster of storms move through our risk area in the early morning, that will, like you said, stabilize the atmosphere throughout the morning and early afternoon hours, which could prevent some convection from firing before our main threat begins in the evening hours. So that may not actually end up being a good thing.
And I'd venture to say that the reason these later cells are not as robust and discrete as what the HER was showing is because of that initial invection kind of making its way through the area and eating up a bunch of the instability that was already there. So even though because there is going to be that break in the clouds allowing for that diurnal heating, it's going to be starting off at a much lower point than if instability wise if we didn't have that much initial early messy convection moving through the area.
So, pulling up a sounding from about 4 p.m., which is when our peak daytime heating would occur, we do see a fairly favorable environment for a all hazards potential with our tornado threat showing here in our photograph with good low level curvature with 49 knots of surface to 6 kilometer shear. Looking at our temperature and dew point profile out ahead of the convection that would happen, we do have a low level inversion here, which would likely prevent storms from initiating earlier on, along with a dry slot here. This kind of gives a loaded gun sounding look, which would be conducive for supercell development. And our SRH values are about 100 at this time, but this will pick up as our low level jet increases. Now I want to move ahead to 0Z here. We might have a little bit of contamination here, but the general idea does still stand that our CAPE values will be very high, which means that our hail will likely be very large if sustained updrafts can get going. Additionally, we also still have our cap here, so it is also a question of whether storms will be able to initiate from this spot. But our lift and condensation level is also very low, as we have dew points at 70 degrees at the surface in Iowa.
All right, so looking at our in the southern plains at our at our dew point at our surface dew point values, we see that the dew point values are quite high across the slight risk area, and they're in the mid to even upper 60s for the like southernmost portions. And we also notice that there's this gradient, which is indicative of the dry line. So the dry line is essentially set up across sort of in the middle of Kansas down to Oklahoma and into northwestern sections of Texas. And as we go through the day, by noon, you can see that the dry line has advanced a bit. The dew points have increased a lot more, or increased some into mainly the upper 60s, which means there's a lot of low level moisture present for any thunderstorms that do develop to take advantage of. And then we see the dry line sort of moving to the east towards, and it's, by midday it's positioned kind of extending down from eastern Kansas down into western Texas here. And then as we go through, if we go to 21Z, or let's go through 0Z, we have so dew points remain consistently high throughout the day, and our dry line essentially kind of stalls out at that point and maybe starts retreating a little bit by that time.
We'll go ahead and jump in here. I think through the day, like I should note that models sometimes do struggle to initialize and forecast accurately where and when the dry line will be and when it'll retreat. But you do kind of see that through the day. It does push slightly eastward, and then it does begin to retreat into the late evening hours. I think the timing of when this is going to happen is going to greatly impact whether we get our convective initiation across some of these southern risk areas, and also the location of where they initiate is strongly dependent on where this dry line will be.
So looking at the reflectivity or the composite reflectivity for the southern edge of the slight risk, we can kind of see at 12Z that we already have some cells that forming in the morning, but as we kind of move throughout the day, we see that those are going to fall apart, but then a bunch of new cells are going to form on it, and they're going to be much more robust than expected. That's not the word I want to say. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay, run it back. I know what I'll say. Okay. So, kind of looking more at the slight risk down in the southern portions of the US, we see that we're already starting off with some morning convection. And kind of as we roll through the time, we're going to see that some of that might grow a little bit, but that's going to fade away fairly quickly. But once we start getting into the afternoon hours, we start seeing these more robust, discrete cells starting to form. Some of them almost looking like they got some curve in them, like there is a good chance for some rotation potentially on these cells. So, yeah, and kind of looking at these soundings, I mean, look at that hodograph. That is some really good shear, and not too much in the low levels, but yeah, I mean, this is still good for rotation. Looking at our cape values, I mean, there's no cap in place. We have, what is that? 2100 surface cape. So, I mean, we're really in a good spot for this convection to grow and to build, especially with how discrete these are. I think they're not going to choke each other off, so I think they have a chance to really turn into something.
From that sounding as well, the most unstable layer was the surface based cape, right? So that's gonna.
Right.
That
I
bodes
mean, that
well.
kind of just tells you that these storms are going to be surface based.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you also see that with our LCL being, what's that, about 900 millibars or so.
Yeah, and the LFC is not much higher than the LCL. It's like we're at
I
about.
mean, they're lifting off the dry line, so just once they literally touch it, it's just they're gonna shoot right up.
Right. And as we continue through the rest of this loop, we see these storms continue to evolve. And as we get through the evening into the overnight hours, our tornado threat is going to grow as our low level jet does continue to increase.
Kind of comparing it with the NAM, we see that there's actually none of that morning convection, so that's not going to stabilize the atmosphere throughout the day. But kind of as we start passing through and seeing how these form, the NAM, although the NAM's not good at showing how robust it is, we still see that it's very discrete, and the NAM kind of keeps it further north. But once again, I think just because a lot of these storms are not going to be built on top of each other, I really do think they have a really good chance to build up and grow into a healthy supercell.
I mean, honestly, I would not be surprised to see a tornado risk get increased tomorrow across some of these areas.
No, I really think we might up the risk factor in the morning.
So, looking at our 500 millibar heights on Wednesday morning, we see a pronounced upper level trough, sort of situated across the central plains with some embedded shortwaves. And as we go throughout the day, moves to the east, and we also see some more pronounced embedded shortwaves, sort of in the southeastern edge of the trough, which will aid in the synoptic scale lift and upper level divergence for those thunderstorms. And as we go through the night on Wednesday and into Thursday, we see this ridge sort of building into the region, which will create kind of a lull in our more active severe weather pattern. If we go into Friday, we see another very pronounced upper level trough sort of making its way into the Great Plains. And out ahead of it, we've got numerous short waves just along out ahead, and which will promote a lot of upper, synoptic scale lift in upper level divergence for our potential severe or for our potential storm development. And as we go through Saturday and Saturday, we see it kind of moving off to the east, where it's really centered over the Minnesota area. And I also noticed some short waves kind of over Tennessee, the Kentucky area, and also kind of where we might have that front over Texas. And then finally on Sunday, just have the trough has moved off into Canada, and there's really not much. It looks like there might be some more short waves kind of coming in from like in the Texas, New Mexico area, which might aid in more upper level divergence for, potential Sunday and activity across Texas as well.
Going back to Friday, if you would, typically with short waves, because it's a bit more of a subtle way of a lifting mechanism. If the atmosphere is primed, which it is going to be, you're gonna get a lot of more discrete storm mode rather than a big old messy QLCS or MCS with that, and I would believe that'd be why they have enough confidence to issue that day 5 slight risk.
But I think
the thing is so deep.
I think one more thing that you could also say is that we have had a very good look at setups in the future so far this month, but as we've gotten closer to the event, it has downtrended slightly and has become less organized and pronounced. So I think it is something to keep an eye on, but I mean, for sure the environments are conducive. It's just dependent on if we have enough widespread lift through the area, which based on this model run we would. So we'll see if the SPC continues to play it conservative or not. Kind of touching on ensembles and potential uncertainty with our synoptic setup. We actually do see pretty good general agreement throughout our ensemble members here with our upper level troughing in place across the Rocky Mountains moving into the Central Plains. I think the question is more specifically where and when the short waves will pop up, along with the overall intensity of our jet streak as time goes on. Some models do have more of an intense area further south, such as an ensemble member 12, compared to some of the other ensemble members like 7 and 2, which have it further north into the South Dakota and Nebraska region. Ensemble 5 also shows a slightly further south mode here. But I mean, we do have pretty good consensus with our upper level pattern, at least in terms of it happening.
All right, then looking at 12Z Wednesday at our surface dew point temperatures, we can kind of see that the dry line is going to be setting up over the western Texas area, kind of up into Nebraska. And again, this models have kind of a hard time showing where our dry line is going to initiate and kind of its orientation, but this is going to give us a really good guess or a good look at it. So we see that as time progresses, it's going to move more eastward with dew points getting up into the 60s across most of the southern central U.S. And then it's going to slowly make its way back more northwestward. It's going to retreat a little bit. It's going to expand a bit more northward. Again, dew points getting into the mid 60s or mid to upper level 60s all the way up into Minnesota. But then as time progresses, we're going to have that cold front associated with that big old low moving through the area, and it's going to help to decrease those dew points across most of the U.S. and push it more southeast.
I mean, you can really see the extent of that cold front with that low all the way up here in Canada. I mean, look at that massive
That
front.
is really big, really long.
And I think it should also be noted that the severe intensity with the squall line as it moves through Saturday and Sunday is also very uncertain at this time due to the distance from the low pressure system itself. And depending on when it moves into certain areas, like if we see this move into an area in the mid-afternoon hours when daytime heating's peaking, we could see some much higher Cape values, which could help the storm to be able to sustain a stronger updraft, leading to more hail formation. And as we get into the late evening hours, we can also see a embedded tornado risk likely to be occurring with our veering throughout the column, indicating our rotation. But you can see just throughout this entire period, we just have very good surface dew point values throughout our entire risk area across the central and southern plains, and even throughout the southeastern and eastern coast. It's just like you have so much moisture throughout this entire time, and it just will not be an issue, at least in the low levels.
So, on that moisture aspect, I mean, it's moisture's being packed by that dry line there. Look how robust the difference is. What was that? I saw a dew point in the negatives on one side of the dry line, whereas on the other we're up in the 60s. Like, when you talk about this as a lifting mechanism, like, you have to talk about how intense this dry line actually is.
I'm taking a look at our precipitable water values, which basically gives us an indication of moisture throughout our atmospheric column. We see that we do have very good moisture throughout the risk area from Illinois down into South Texas through Wednesday. And as we go forward in time, we see this weak ridge build in to our plains region on Thursday, temporarily lowering our PWatt values and suppressing storm formation. And we will see that as we go through Thursday into Friday, this high will slide off to the south and east into the Gulf and continue to aid in advecting more moisture back into the area as our cutoff low does approach from the western United States. And as we go forward in time, we see plentiful moisture through the column, some values reaching up to 1.7 inches in some of these localized areas, which would be very indicative of heavy rainfall potential. And as we go through Saturday, as our cold front does continue to advance, we do see those PWatt values peak up upwards of almost 1.9 inches in some areas. A wide swath here between 1.7 and 1.9 inches of precipitable water. Now, I would like to point out our mean wind between the surface and 400 millibars will also give us a good idea of our relative storm motion. And we can see that we do have storm motion values between 20 to 30 knots in most of our southern areas, and increasing as we go up closer to our low pressure system. And as we go forward in time through the rest of Saturday into Sunday, we see that our cold front will continue pushing eastward, and we will see a slight return in moisture actually moving into Sunday and Monday, according to the GFS, which could actually set up, based on what we saw earlier with our embedded shortwaves, a slightly heavy precip event potentially in Texas as we move into the early parts of next week.
Yeah, it has that almost a high pressure system forming over the Gulf after that cold front moves through, which is really helping to advect more moisture up into the southern portions of Texas.
Right, you can really see that here, clockwise flow. I mean, granted, this is still very far out, like a week's out, but I mean, if that setup does end up verifying, we could see very heavy precip totals across the southern plains.
We're kind of looking at our Cape values for our risk area, mainly over central Oklahoma, northern Texas especially. We start to see these values peaking over 2,000, which is a good sign for instability. And yeah, as we progress, so let's pull a sounding from central Oklahoma to look at it. And I mean, wow, look at that. Because no cap, I mean, what is that? That's almost 3,000 joules per kilogram of surface-based Cape. And look at that photograph. Oh my God. I mean, this is just perfect for supercell development right here. So talking more about Thursday, there's not really a lifting mechanism in place, so there's not really much to talk about here. Moving on into Friday, as we move forward, yeah, we can see, wow, look at that. Um, how much is that? How much is that?
Wow.
Yep. So if we take a look at our sounding here, we do have that slight cap in place, or slight inversion in place at 21Z. I mean, we do have a very favorable photograph for tornadoes here. Good curvature, 40 knot surface, 6 kilometer shear. But look at our cape values here. Upwards of almost 4,000 joules per kilogram from the, I believe it was the central Iowa region or so, and somewhere in that neck of the woods. But I mean, we're talking about gorilla sized hail here, if this is possible, if this is what's going to happen. This is very unstable. We can also see that here in our lifting index, with our lifting indices being minus 12 from the surface. I mean, that's just very, very unstable.
Yeah, and
I
when
mean,
you
just
have that much instability in the atmosphere, you really don't need a whole lot of forcing to get it going, which harkens back to the main lifting mechanism that's going to be over this area, which is going to be those short waves moving through, which don't provide much lift at all. But for an environment like this, that's going to work out quite favorable to
I mean,
help.
even
Yeah.
I mean, even with that cap in place, I mean, it's gonna lift right past the cap. That's
Yeah,
not even a cap.
I would
It's
even
just
call that a cap, man.
yeah,
It's an
That's
inversion,
why
it
I
ain't a
switched
cap.
that to inversion, because that's just like, I was just like, yeah, that's not going to stop anything.
no, it's not. This is just a really good environment.
Yeah, I was gonna say one thing to note about that sounding, it's kind of got that inverted V shape to it as well in the lower levels, which, could make it more favorable for downbursts potentially.
Yeah, look at your D cape, 1,048 joules per kilogram. So that'll definitely be something to watch as well as this day gets a little bit closer.
I think this is just all around gonna be impressive for, if these can keep up, if these models, are right.
Yeah, if these model runs verify, I think we'll be looking at a pretty good day from a severe weather standpoint.
Right, and now as we head into Saturday with our cold front advancing, we don't really have very high cape values here, um, getting up towards 500-ish to 700-ish joules per kilogram in some areas, down in our southern area. But this is where I talk about if the timing of the front does matter here. If this front is, let's say, slightly further off to the west from what the GFS has modeled, and it arrives slightly later into our risk area, we could see cape values soar more into the 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram range, potentially even higher, depending on when this would move in. But we could really see a very severe squall line if that does verify.
Also, this is just surface-based cape. You could also, if you look at a sounding of that, since our main focusing mechanism is going to be the front, depending on how far the front has passed, if we have enough elevated lifting, we also could. But yeah, I guess this one there's not too much lifting. I mean, it's just saturated across the whole lake.
There's still 1,200 joules per kilogram of cape, and the most unstable again is the surface. But I kind of wanted to go back to the timing of the front that you were talking about. Something I've noticed so far this season, and I don't know if y'all have as well, but when riding those AFDs, the GFS has been a little bit more aggressive on the timing. It has stuff initiating earlier and faster than what has typically been happening, even if not by much.
Right, I do agree with that, but yeah, definitely going to be something to watch as we head into Saturday and potentially even into Sunday, depending on the timing of this front.
Something I also would note about that sounding is it's got a lot of skinny cape and it's very moist throughout the column. And it also has quite a deep warm layer, I believe. So,
Yes, we do not
You
drop
could
below
potentially get
freezing.
some
We don't drop below
heavy,
freezing until
yeah,
600.
which means you could get some heavier rainfall in that region as well. All right, so looking at our cloud cover Wednesday morning, we we see that there's quite a bit of clouds, upper level and mid level clouds across sort of the central parts of the U.S. But we also see behind these clouds, you see quite a bit of clearing in the central, in the Great Plains region, like in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, which will help in more daytime heating, which will increase CAPE um, and favor more thunderstorm development across there for Wednesday. And then kind of going through, into Thursday, we see there's a bit of a clearing and a bit of a lull in the cloud cover across kind of the central U.S. And that's due to there's a ridge moving through, which will produce some upper level subsidence and which will limit the cloud cover there. And going through, looking at Thursday night, Friday, we see that cloud cover does begin to build over the central U.S. It's really associated with that upper level trough that was discussed earlier. And then we can actually start to see where the front, going into Friday evening, where the front starts to move as it's moving to the southeast. We can see that kind of band of clouds extending from Texas all the way up into Illinois. That's really is indicative of where our front is located. So definitely lots of mid-level and upper level. And then moving through on Saturday, we have that front kind of, you can notice, and there's also a distinct comma look as well. Our low pressure system kind of located over Wisconsin at this time. Got our comma look, which is commonly associated with extratropical cyclones, and then we have a front kind of extending to the southeast. And as we move forward in time, by Sunday, it's kind of draped all across the eastern United States there. Yeah, and that's quite an impressive looking cyclone. I know this is just a simulated cloud cover, but it is still quite impressive.
So, kind of taking more a look at simulated precipitation for this event. Not much quite in the morning of Wednesday, but as we progress through the day, we start to see that convective initiation in the early afternoon, early evening hours, starting roughly around 21Z, 0Z. Kind of see that starting to build along. And then as we continue moving forward, we get into Thursday, which is where that ridge takes place. And so not really much is going to happen while this ridge is in the central U.S. But then moving into Friday, when we start to see that low pressure moving up and starting to catch up with that dry line, taking over with a cold front, you can already kind of see that ahead of the low there is some convective initiation forming, and that is a lot already. So kind of looking as we go into Friday night, Saturday morning, we see that convection ahead of the low, but then with that trailing cold front, we see that it is starting to pick up more convection, more precipitation. Now, with how strong we said that cold front is with such a big gap in the dew point, I feel like this is severely underdoing this. I really do think we're going to see a lot higher precipitation amounts, but this kind of gives that timing as it works its way through. Just while the cold front passes by.
Now taking a look at our rainfall accumulations throughout our forecasting period, we see some locally heavy amounts due to some thunderstorm development. And as we go forward in time, we'll see that we might have some morning convection ongoing here, as hinted at earlier by the HER and the NAM model through our enhanced risk. And we'll see that as we progress, we do have that ridge in place on Thursday, so we will not have any convection here, and our decaying shortwave will continue propagating eastward across the Kentucky and Tennessee area. And now moving into our next big setup on Friday, we'll see some morning convection out ahead of our big upper level trough here in the Oklahoma and Missouri and Arkansas areas, which could limit our instability slightly in the early afternoon, which could provide a cap before main convection initiates, if it were to initiate in the south. And more now looking into the northern parts of the area, we can see some higher QPF totals probably associated with our supercell development or our heavy MCS rainfall, depending on the storm mode, which is still uncertain this far out in time. And as we continue through this period, we do see some locally heavy amounts, according to the GFS, upwards of, wow, almost 4 inches down in the Minnesota and Iowa border if this were to verify. And as we continue going forward in time, we do see our rainfall totals across the south staying on the lower end, surprisingly, from the GFS, which I believe is slightly underdoing it, only getting upwards of a quarter inch in some areas. But with very high PWatt values, I would not be surprised to see this be much higher as we get closer to the event and when convective allowing models do get into range.
Something I want to add there is that with rainfall amount totaling like close to that 4 inches, you have to start thinking about like what type of hazards will be with that. And I mean, with 3.76 inches predicted rainfall totals, and again, this is pretty far out, so I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into the actual totals of this, but if that does verify, you'd have to start thinking about flash flooding being a major risk.
I mean, yeah, this is only in 6 hours. So, but talking about if it verifies, as we pointed out, time and time again on this video, there's a lot of moisture. There's a lot of moisture at the surface and a lot of moisture aloft. And so, these values are fairly realistic just because we're going to be dumping so much rain out with just all these lovely sources.
So that's going to wrap it up for this video, y'all. There's definitely some interesting weather in our future, so if you're in any of the highlighted areas that we pointed out throughout the course of this video, make sure you're staying weather aware, keeping up to date with all the relevant information as these storms move through your area, as they can pose a fairly hazardous risk as we move throughout this week. If you guys like this, let us know down in the comments. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. It helps us out a lot, and it don't take much of your time, but that's really about it. We'll see y'all in the next one.